Imagine standing at the bottom of a massive, ancient valley. The air is sharp and cold against your skin. It sounds like a polite, inspiring suggestion for how to be a decent person in a complicated world. But we have completely misread the room. Kings are completely corrupt. If the royal shepherds have turned into wolves, who is left to protect the flock? The answer requires God to do something shocking. He is going to bypass the corrupted power structures entirely to establish true justice. God has to flip the map upside down and elevate a different mountain entirely. The destruction of Jerusalem sounds like the absolute end of the story. When a prophet declares that the temple of God will be reduced to a pile of rubble and weeds, there seems to be no hope remaining. But in the very next breath, at the exact midpoint of the book, Micah's vision violently shifts. He looks past the impending doom of the capital and sees a future reality that completely reverses the trajectory of the world. In chapter 4, Micah declares that in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and peoples will stream to it. This is a massive cross-biblical pattern. Throughout Scripture, mountains are places of divine encounter, authority, and revelation. But Micah's vision is shocking because of who is climbing the mountain. The book of Micah is not a collection of inspirational quotes. It is a legal prosecution. When the prophet delivers his most famous line, it is not just the faithful remnant of Israel. It is a river of humanity. Many nations, Gentiles, foreigners, former enemies are walking up the slope together, saying, "Come a wire. Let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths." God's response to the catastrophic failure of his people is not to abandon his redemptive plan. His response is to expand his invitation to the entire world. And when these nations reach the summit to learn God's Mishpat, his true justice, the world is radically transformed. Micah delivers one of the most breathtaking images in all of biblical literature. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. This is not merely a poetic metaphor for inner peace. This is a physical, economic, and political reversal. The weapons designed to pierce human flesh are melted down in the fire and hammered into agricultural tools designed to feed human beings. The machinery of empire is completely reallocated to the harvest. And notice the deeply personal contrast that follows. In Micah chapter 2, the corrupt elites were seizing. He is not standing in a sunny meadow giving a motivational speech on ethics. He is standing in a cosmic courtroom, farms and throwing vulnerable families out of their homes. But here on God's restored mountain, Micah says, everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid. The age of the predator is over. The age of exploitation is finished. God is promising a kingdom where security is not a luxury reserved for the wealthy elite, but a fundamental reality for every person. Up to this point, the question has been historical. Now it becomes cosmic. God is going to establish a universal kingdom of peace, but this creates an immediate problem. A universal kingdom needs a king. The current royal line, sitting on the throne in Jerusalem, is deeply contaminated by greed, compromise, and violence. The kings of Judah have acted like wolves. If God places another wolf on the throne, the new kingdom will simply become another slaughterhouse. God needs a shepherd who will lay down his life for the sheep, but he is not going to find one in the palaces of the capital. So God bypasses the wealthy, fortified city of Jerusalem entirely. He turns his back on the political machinery, the religious performances, and the glittering wealth of the elite. God has just filed a formal lawsuit against his own people. He has subpoenaed the very foundations of the earth to hear the case, to find the true king. God looks to a different location, a place so small and insignificant that the powerful leaders of society completely ignored it. Jerusalem was an ancient fortress, built on a steep ridge, surrounded by massive stone walls, and overflowing with the wealth of the political elite. If you were looking for a king to save the nation and establish a global empire of peace, Jerusalem was the only logical place to look. It was the center of religious power, military strength, and royal heritage. But God completely ignores the capital. His eyes leave the wealthy estates and the corrupted temple courts, sweeping south toward a tiny, insignificant village. In the 5th chapter, Micah delivers one of the most stunning reversals in prophetic literature. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. This is the Bethlehem anomaly. Bethlehem was not a fortified military stronghold. It was a vulnerable, dusty, working-class agricultural town. It had no political leverage, no massive treasury, and no grand temple. But it had one vital historical connection. It was the ancestral home of David, the shepherd boy who became Israel's greatest king. And the words we casually print on our coffee mugs are not a friendly piece of advice. They are the crushing, inescapable verdict. By choosing Bethlehem, God is making a profound statement about how his kingdom operates. He is going back to the roots. The royal line of David in Jerusalem had become completely corrupted by power, greed, and exploitation. The kings had forgotten how to be shepherds. They had become predators. So, God is going to cut the dead, corrupt tree down to the stump and start over from the very beginning. He is bypassing the human public relations machinery. He is bypassing the military strength and the religious elite. God's salvation always comes through humility and obscurity, never through human posturing and political arrogance. Micah promises that this new ruler will not act like the kings of the capital. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. And then, Micah adds a phrase that changes the nature of the promise, and he will be our peace. He does not merely say that this king will bring peace, or negotiate peace, or enforce peace with a sword. He himself is the peace. The false prophets of Jerusalem preached a cheap, fake peace in exchange for bribes. This shepherd king will embody true, lasting peace. The problem is not that the verse is unclear. The problem is that we stop reading too early, providing perfect security for a vulnerable flock. We now have the complete picture of God's redemptive horizon. We have the future mountain, where the weapons of empire are melted down into agricultural plows. We have the future king rising from the quiet obscurity of a shepherd's village. We have the guarantee of a restored, secure people. But one massive piece of the story remains unresolved. This beautiful vision of the future does not automatically erase the crimes of the present. We cannot simply skip to the Bethlehem promise and ignore the terrifying reality we started with. The wealthy elites are still crushing the poor. The religious leaders are still using God's name to defend their corruption, and the jury of stone is still waiting for an answer. The lawsuit is still pending. To understand what God actually demands from us, we have to re-enter the cosmic courtroom. We have to face the judge, which brings us directly back to the mountains, the trial, and the most famous verse in the book. The air grows cold again. The beautiful vision of the future Bethlehem fades, and the massive, ancient mountains return. The trial has resumed. We are back in the courtroom of Micah chapter 6, and the jury of stone is waiting. Or we pull the verse entirely out of its ancient context. We strip the words of their historical weight. In the ancient Near East, when a great king made a treaty with a lesser nation, they would often call upon the natural world, the mountains, the rivers, and the earth itself to witness the agreement. If the lesser nation broke the treaty, the offended king would issue a formal, legal prosecution. In Hebrew, this is called a rib, pronounced reeve. It is a covenant lawsuit. God is bringing a rib against his people. He calls the mountains to the witness stand because they were there when the covenant was signed at Sinai. They have watched the entire history of this nation unfold. But when the Almighty Judge opens his mouth to deliver his opening statement, he does not begin with raging thunder. He begins with a question that sounds like a broken heart. My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. The judge steps down from the bench and speaks like a betrayed father. He reminds them of their history. He says, I brought you up out of Egypt. I redeemed you from the land of slavery. He is saying, I rescued you from an empire that crushed the vulnerable and built its wealth on the backs of slaves. So why have you turned Jerusalem into another Egypt? We want the beautiful, poetic conclusion without having to face the terrifying reality of what caused the trial in the first place. Why are you doing to your own brothers what Pharaoh did to you? The people standing trial are suddenly terrified. They realize they are caught. The evidence is undeniable. The exploitation in their streets and the corruption in their courts cannot be hidden from the eyes of the judge. So, they panic. They scramble for a legal loophole, and they offer a defense that exposes just how deeply they have misunderstood the heart of God. They try to buy him off. In the text, the people begin to negotiate. With what shall I come before the Lord? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Notice the desperate escalation. They start with the standard Levitical requirement, a calf, but they feel the crushing weight of their guilt. So they multiply it. What about thousands of rams? What about 10,000 rivers of expensive oil? They are trying to overwhelm God with an absurd, impossible display of religious wealth. And then they offer the ultimate, horrifying payment. Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? They have completely lost their minds. The prophet Micah was speaking to a real people, living in a real time of unprecedented wealth and terrifying inequality. They are treating Yahweh like a bloodthirsty pagan deity who can be bought off with extreme religious performance. They believe that if they just write a large enough check, offer enough resources, or even sacrifice their own children, God will overlook the fact that they are devouring the poor. But you cannot bribe the judge of the universe with religious rituals when you are breaking his heart by abusing his people. He does not want their rivers of oil. He does not want their thousands of rams. And he certainly does not want their performative, bloody sacrifices. He refuses to let them buy their way out of the indictment. This brings the entire trial to a crashing halt. The desperate negotiations fail. The jury of stone waits in silence. If extreme religious sacrifice is not the answer, if the wealth of the capital cannot pay for its crimes, what does God actually demand? The verdict is finally delivered, and it destroys every illusion of religious control we have ever built. The silence in the cosmic courtroom is finally broken. The judge rejects the frantic negotiations. He does not want the thousands of rams. He was addressing a society that believed they were safe simply because they performed the correct religious rituals and attended the proper festivals. He does not want the rivers of oil. He silences the panic and issues the definitive verdict. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. When you read these words against the backdrop of the corruption in Jerusalem and the terrifying reality of the covenant lawsuit, they stop looking like a motivational slogan. They become a laser pointed directly at the human heart. God breaks his requirement down into 3 precise commands. First, to act justly. We already know the massive weight of this word. This is Mishpat. God is not telling you to merely follow the laws of your country. He is demanding that you take whatever power, resources, and influence you possess, and use them to protect the vulnerable. It means refusing to turn a blind eye to systems that crush people for profit. Second, to love mercy. The Hebrew word here is hesed. It is one of the most magnificent words in Scripture, meaning covenant loyalty, steadfast love, and fierce, active compassion. But notice the specific verb attached to it. God does not just say, "Show mercy," or "Do mercy." He commands us to love it. You cannot just write a check to a charity out of a sense of grim obligation and call it hesed. Towering peaks of granite and limestone surround you on every side, blocking out the horizon and casting long, heavy shadows across the uneven ground. The central question of Micah is not whether we should be nice people. The question is what God does when people who claim to bear his name. You must actually delight in the process of showing grace to people who do not deserve it. Third, to walk humbly with your God. This is the deepest cut of the entire trial. The leaders of Jerusalem thought they could walk arrogantly with God. They thought they could manage him with their wealth and control, him with their religious rituals. Walking humbly means dropping the illusion of control. It means abandoning the lie that you can negotiate with the Creator or earn his favor through performance. And this is where the historical trial becomes deeply personal. What are you bringing to the courtroom to buy God off? What is your modern version of the thousands of rams? Perhaps it is your flawless theological knowledge. Perhaps it is your consistent church attendance, your generous tithe, or your respectable moral reputation. We are constantly tempted to offer God our religious performance to cover up the fact that we are harboring resentment, ignoring the marginalized, or treating the people in our own homes with quiet cruelty. But God is not distracted by the performance. He does not want your religious resume. He wants your heart. And he wants to see how that heart treats the people made in his image. Walking humbly means standing before the judge with empty hands, admitting that you have nothing to offer but your absolute dependence on his grace. Use it to cover up their own corruption. What happens when a nation replaces genuine, costly devotion with cheap, performative religion? But this realization creates a terrifying problem. If God requires perfect mishpat, perfect hesed, and perfect humility, we are all in serious trouble. Because if we are completely honest, we have all failed this test. We have all chosen self-preservation over justice. We have all shown mercy only when it was convenient or when it made us look good. We have all tried to manage God with our behavior. If the story stops here at Micah 6-8, there is no hope for any of us. The jury of stone will pronounce us guilty. What happens when we fail to live up to this absolute standard? Does the hammer of justice simply fall and crush us? The answer is found at the very end of the text. The book of Micah does not end in the courtroom. It ends with a stunning revelation, hidden within the prophet's own name. To fully understand the message of Micah, you have to look at the very name of the prophet himself. The Hebrew name Micah literally means, "who is like Yahweh." It is a question that hangs over the entire book like a beacon of hope. For 7 chapters, we have walked through a terrifying landscape. We have stood in the cold shadows of the ancient mountains, acting as a silent, unmoving jury. We have looked at the glittering, deceptive wealth of capitals built on extortion and the horrifying reality of spiritual cannibalism in the pulpits. This is not ultimately a story about how to be a good, moral person. It is a story about a God who destroys fake religion. We have traced the prophecy down to the dusty, obscure streets of Bethlehem, waiting for a shepherd king who would embody true Mishpat. And we have sat in the crushing silence of the cosmic courtroom, realizing that our religious performances are thousands of rams, and our rivers of oil could never buy off the judge. If God were merely a mirror of human justice, the verdict would be final. The hammer would fall. The jury of stone would execute the sentence. But the book of Micah does not end with a closed courtroom door. It ends with an explosion of unimaginable grace. In the final verses of the book, the prophet steps back from the indictment, looks up at the God who issued the cosmic lawsuit, and answers his own name. He asks a question that staggers the human imagination. Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy. Notice the stunning twist at the heart of the redemption story. The judge who stood on the bench to prosecute our corruption is the exact same God who steps down to take the sentence upon himself. He does not minimize our sin. nor does he sweep our exploitation under the rug. Instead, he absorbs the penalty to rescue the oppressed and pardon the broken. He is a God who refuses to look away when the vulnerable are crushed. Especially when, and then, Micah uses one of the most powerful, comforting images in all of Scripture to describe what God does with our failures. You will again have compassion on us. You will tread our sins underfoot and hurl all our iniquities into the depths of the sea. Think about that physical image. God does not bury our sins in a shallow grave where they can be dug up again by our guilt or our enemies. He hurls them into the deepest part of the ocean. He sinks them where they can never be found, never be retrieved, and never be used against us again. This brings us full circle. Remember where we began. In the opening scene of this journey, we stood in a cold, lonely valley, surrounded by massive, towering peaks of granite and limestone. Those mountains were a terrifying jury of stone, watching every failure, listening to every corrupt transaction, and waiting to condemn us. But look at those mountains now. The courtroom has vanished. The cold walls of stone have been transformed. Those very same peaks are no longer the terrifying heights of a legal prosecution. They are the exalted, peaceful hills of the shepherd's pasture, where the scattered flock is finally gathered home. The weapons of empire have been melted down into plowshares. Every person sits safely under their own vine and fig tree. The crushing is being done by the very people who attend his temple. To understand the weight of the final verdict, and the judge, who once demanded a strict accounting, has become the shepherd who leads his people beside quiet waters. You do not have to perform for God. You do not have to buy his favor with religious busywork, or hide your failures behind a mask of artificial success. You can stand before him with empty hands, knowing that your guilt has already been sunk to the bottom of the sea. The God of Micah is not looking to crush you with a verdict you cannot earn. He is waiting to pardon you with a grace you could never imagine. We cannot begin in the courtroom. We have to understand the specific indictment. We have to examine the evidence. And to find it, we have to leave the silence of the jury of stone and walk directly into the glittering, wealthy streets of the ancient capital. The air in 8th century Jerusalem and Samaria smelled of roasting meat, expensive incense, and political success. If you were to walk through the bustling markets of these dual capital cities during the ministry of Micah, you would not see a society on the brink of collapse. You would see a golden age. Under the reigns of King Uzziah in the south, you are completely alone in the dust. Yet you know you are being watched. Suddenly, a voice echoes against the stone, calling the mountains to attention, and King Jeroboam II in the north. The borders had expanded. Major trade routes were secure. The military was strong, and wealth was flowing into the urban centers at an unprecedented rate. Elite citizens were building luxurious homes, wearing fine garments, and throwing lavish banquets. And on top of all this economic prosperity, the temple courts were packed. The religious festivals were observed flawlessly. The choirs sang the traditional psalms, and the priests offered the correct sacrifices on schedule. From the outside, it looked like the absolute blessing of God. But the biblical prophets do not look at a nation's wealth to measure its health. They look at its margins. And beneath the glittering surface of this economic boom time, a deep spiritual rot was eating away at the foundation of the covenant. The prosperity of the capital was not the result of divine favor. It was the result of systemic extortion. In the second chapter of the book, Micah pulls back the curtain on how this wealth was actually being generated. He describes wealthy elites who lie awake in their beds at night, staring at the ceiling, carefully calculating how to steal from their neighbors. As soon as the morning light breaks, they execute their plans. They use their power, their lawyers, and their influence. It is a legal summons. The towering peaks are not just scenery. They are a silent, unmoving jury to seize fields and confiscate homes. In the ancient agrarian world, land was not simply real estate. A family's land was their sacred inheritance. It was the specific portion given to them by God when the tribes first entered the land. It represented their identity, their security, and their only means of survival. To seize a family's land was to erase their future and sever their connection to God's promise. Yet, the powerful elites were legally manipulating the system to foreclose on the vulnerable, pushing small farmers into debt slavery while expanding their own massive estates, and then having ruined families throughout the week. These same leaders would walk into the temple on the Sabbath, wash their hands, and offer sacrifices of thanksgiving to Yahweh. They believed that as long as the religious machinery kept turning, God would overlook the economic exploitation in the streets. They were completely wrong. The biblical prophets are not anti-wealth, they are anti-exploitation. God is not impressed by a rising gross domestic product when it is built on the broken backs of the vulnerable. He refuses to accept the worship of a society that sings hymns to his name while destroying the very people made in his image. The legal indictment in Micah's cosmic courtroom is not aimed at the surrounding pagan empires. It is aimed directly at the capitals of God's own people, and you are the defendant standing trial. This is exactly how the most famous chapter in the prophetic book of Micah begins. And God does not simply offer a vague critique of abstract economic theories. He points his finger directly at the men, standing in the pulpits, and the rulers sitting on the thrones. He exposes the judges, the priests, and the professional prophets, who have turned a system of divine justice into a predatory machine. And when Micah finally describes what these leaders are actually doing to the people they were called to protect, he uses a metaphor so violent it is difficult to read. Listen to the horrifying language Micah uses to describe the politicians, judges, and religious leaders of his day. Hear now, you, leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, should you not embrace justice? But you hate good and love evil. You tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones. You eat my people's flesh. Strip off their skin and break their bones in pieces. You chop them up like meat for the pan, like flesh for the pot. This is not a polite theological disagreement. This is a scene from a slaughterhouse. Micah is describing a society where the leadership has become entirely predatory. The rulers are not literally eating the citizens, but they are consuming them economically through corrupt legal rulings, heavy taxation, and rigged scales in the marketplace. The elite are stripping the vulnerable down to the bone. If you are familiar with the Bible, or even if you just occasionally walk through a modern Christian bookstore, you already know the phrase, "The people who were appointed to be shepherds of the flock have turned into wolves, feeding on the very sheep they were called to protect." And the spiritual leaders are entirely complicit in the violence. Micah turns his attention to the professional prophets and the temple priests. In the ancient world, a prophet was supposed to be the conscience of the nation, the one who spoke God's truth to power. But the prophets of Jerusalem have monetized their ministry. Micah exposes their business model. If someone feeds them, they proclaim peace. If he does not, they prepare to wage war against him. It is a pay-to-play theology. If a wealthy landowner brings a generous donation to the prophet, he receives a glowing sermon about God's blessing, peace, and security. The prophet will declare shalom over the man's household, ignoring the fact that the man's wealth was stolen from a widow. But if a poor farmer cannot afford to pay the religious fee, the prophet declares holy war against him. The religious establishment has weaponized the name of God to endorse the greed of the rich and to spiritually terrorize the poor. And the most terrifying part is their absolute confidence. Micah says these leaders lean upon the Lord and confidently declare, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy. Is not the Lord among us? No disaster will come upon us." They are convinced that God is an accessory to their crimes. They believe that because they have the temple, the rituals, and the correct theological vocabulary, God is obligated to protect their corruption. They have reduced the creator of the universe to a divine mascot for their political machine. God views this performative, corrupt religion as a form of spiritual cannibalism. It sickens him, and he refuses to endorse it. Because of this violent hypocrisy, Micah announces a devastating consequence. Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble. The Temple Mount itself will become a mound overgrown with wild thickets. God is not going to reform the system. He is going to tear the entire structure down to the bedrock. The destruction of the capital is certain. The false peace will be shattered. But to understand the true depth of their failure, and what God will ultimately demand when He issues His final verdict, we have to look closely at a single Hebrew word. It is the very thing the leaders threw away. And it changes our entire understanding of the cosmic courtroom. In the opening lines of his indictment against the rulers, Micah asks a sharp, rhetorical question: should you not embrace justice and to walk humbly with your God? We love Micah's chest. Awesome. We print it on our morning coffee mugs. We paint it on rustic wooden signs. This is the core of the prosecution. The leaders have failed at their most fundamental task. But to understand the severity of this failure, we have to look closely at the specific word Micah uses. The English translation is accurate, but the original term carries an additional, profound sense that most modern readers completely miss. The Hebrew word is Mishpat. If you look it up in a standard lexicon, it translates directly to justice or judgment. But the way a modern Western society thinks about justice is very different from how an ancient Israelite understood Mishpat. In the modern West, our cultural image of justice is a statue of a woman wearing a blindfold. She holds a sword in one hand and a pair of scales in the other. For us, justice is impartial and retributive. It means catching the guilty party, applying the correct legal penalty, and restoring order through punishment. We see justice primarily as a weapon against crime. But biblical Mishpat is not blindfolded. It has its eyes wide open, specifically looking for those who have been pushed to the margins of society. In the Hebrew Bible, Mishpat is an action word. It is repeatedly linked to a specific quartet of vulnerable people: the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, and the poor. In the ancient agrarian world, these were the individuals who had no land, no financial safety net, and no legal protection, and hang it in our living rooms. We put it on canvas tote bags and treat it as a gentle, motivational manifesto for moral living. They were entirely at the mercy of the powerful. True Mishpat means taking your own power, to your own wealth, and your own influence, and using it to shield those who have none. It is not merely the absence of oppression, it is the active presence of equity. It means restoring the vulnerable to their rightful place in the community. When God looks at a nation, He does not measure its health by the wealth of its political elite, but by the security of its most vulnerable citizens. This changes how you read the prophet's anger. The leaders in Jerusalem were not simply failing to enforce the law. They were using the legal system itself, the very courts, designed to dispense Mishpat, to devour the poor. They were using their wealth to bend the scales in their own favor, foreclosing on family farms and silencing opposition. They had taken the sanctuary of justice and turned it into a slaughterhouse for personal profit. Because they destroyed Mishpat, God promises to destroy their capital. In the terrible closing lines of chapter 3, Micah declares that because of this bloodshed, the mountain of Jerusalem will be plowed like a field, and the glorious Temple Mount will become a mound overgrown with wild thickets. But this creates a terrifying question. God has sworn that His kingdom will be a kingdom of Mishpat. But how can this justice ever become a reality when the current,